Stop slipping and stop cutting your socks. We have 15 different color options between 3 grip socks and 2 sleeve types. Something for everybody at a price that just makes sense. Available now at puregripsocks.com.
It's official, Rodri is the winner of what has once again been a controversial Ballon d'Or. And while I'm sure everyone will leave their thoughts and opinions on who should have won the Ballon d'Or this year, what I have on the table in front of me are the boots of the top 3. Rodri, Vinicius Jr., and Jude Bellingham. If they're technically the top 3 best players in the world, are these the best 3 football boots currently on the market? Let's discuss that. Where really quickly, if you guys do enjoy comparison videos like this, don't forget to drop a like on the video and make sure you're subscribed if you haven't already so you don't miss out on my reviews of all the latest football boots of 2024. Starting with the price, where Rodri's boots are the Nike Phantom Luna 2 Elite, the mid-cut variation of the current top-end Phantom, which bears a retail price of $285. However, if you don't necessarily need a mid-cut collar, you can opt for the low-cut GX2 Elite, which retails for $260. Where Vinny Jr., unlike Rodri, prefers the low-cut version of his boot of choice, which is the Zoom Mercurial Vapor 16 Elite. This is a football boot that retails for $260. However, if you do like the mid-cut collar, you can go for the mid-cut Superfly 10 Elite, which retails for $285. Where Jude is the lone Adidas athlete of the bunch, opting to play in the Adidas Predator Elite FT, which of course is the variation with the fold-over tongue, where he just got his first ever signature colorway with the JB on the tongue of the left football boot and his signature logo there on the heel. The FT version of the Predator is the most expensive one, retailing for $280. However, if you don't necessarily need the fold-over tongue or maybe would prefer the boots without the extra bulk, you can go for the non-FT variation for $260. When it comes to touch on the ball, it's kind of interesting that these are the 3 boots out of everything currently on the market that arguably place more of an emphasis on additional grip on the ball than anything else. However, they do so in very different ways. Where in the case of Rodri's Phantom Lunas, they of course features Nike's grip knit material, which is just like the fly knit that they've been putting out on their football boots for the better part of 10 years now, but with this soft, almost silicone-like texturing on the surface that is grippy against the ball. Add in some ridge texturing and you do get a little bit of a break to the grip sensation, and the actual fly knit itself does have a little bit of additional thickness and softness to it, meaning that while the boot is still very thin in terms of feel for the ball, it does have that little bit of padding to it in addition to the additional grip that I think really does make for a really nice sensation of control. And obviously the Nike Phantom series, whether it's the mid-cut Luna or the low-cut GX, is technically marketed as a control boot, and I don't necessarily think that control boots will make your touch better, but certainly having that additional grip and also being able to manipulate the spin a little bit more easily, particularly when passing and shooting, the sense of control that you get from the additional grip on offer here is definitely something that I think a lot of people would maybe not so much benefit from, but really enjoy the feel and experience of should they give something like this a try. Where in the case of the Mercurials, Vinny's current boot of choice, Nike have also chosen to include their grip knit technology, which once again, just like the Phantoms, does take up the majority of the upper, giving you that soft silicone grippy texture on the surface that is super noticeable on the ball. In terms of peak grip, because it doesn't have the ridge texturing and because the upper as a whole is a little bit thinner, I don't necessarily think they feel quite as grippy as what you're going to find from the Phantoms, despite being a very similar material. But therein lies really the main difference between the Mercs and the Phantoms if you're having a hard time deciding between the two, given that they both feature grip knit uppers. If you still like that speed boot feel and aesthetic, certainly the tighter, slimmer fit of the Mercurial, the thinner, more barefoot feel of the upper. This has less padding than what you're going to find from the Phantoms. And of course, the more aggressive design that you have to the sole plate and stud pattern, that's really where I think you should make your choice between the Mercurials and the Phantoms as they're currently on offer. But then again, if you're not a fan of additional grip, then once again, the Mercurial, just like the Phantom, might not necessarily be the best choice for you. Whereas it relates specifically to the Mercurial series, I think a lot of people that buy these boots fancy themselves as pacey players that like to dribble, and in that particular situation, having that additional grip, particularly for dribbling, could be a blessing or a bit of a nuisance. If you're somebody that tends to drag the ball a lot and you don't like having that extra grip, it could actually cause you to trip a little bit, or at the very least would just take some getting used to. Just know that from a touch on the ball perspective as it relates to grip, these are very different than every Mercurial model that has come before it. Where Jude's Predator also emphasize grip on the ball, but they do so in a very different way, and also in a way that is much more targeted rather than providing grip across the entire foot. The main body of the upper is made from their Hybrid Touch 2.0 synthetic material that is a little bit more leather-like in terms of its general sensation on foot. It has more structure. It's going to require a little bit more break-in time than the knit-based materials of the other two boots that we're talking about in this video. But once broken in, it's going to have that nice solid feel, but also a general thickness that is still what I would classify as on the thinner side. Not necessarily to the point where I would say that they offer a barefoot feel, but there's just a little bit more substance to this upper than what you're going to find from most thin synthetic materials. And then of course, running through the medial side of the foot, as well as even on the top side of this giant fold over tongue, are the strike skin rubber elements that are made from this really soft rubber material with flexible fins that provide a noticeable amount of extra grip on the ball, where if we're really talking about peak grip, particularly when shooting, this bites the ball harder than the grip knit material of the two Nike boots that we've previously looked at. If you're looking for grip, particularly when passing and shooting, maybe even controlling the ball when you are frequently using this part of the foot, you're getting it here, whereas every other part of your foot, particularly if you're somebody that likes to push the ball with the outside of your foot, there's nothing that's necessarily going to stick to the ball, which is something that I am really a big fan of, and it really is that classic Adidas Predator recipe. With the only thing to note with the current Preds is, like I've talked about in previous reviews, every colorway seems to have a little bit of a different finish on the surface of the synthetic upper, where this one has more of that soft, almost kind of like a nubuck type finish, slightly matte, a little bit grippier on the ball than some of the ones that have more of like a glossy, shiny finish. Some of them have a little bit of micro texture to them. They're all a little bit different, not to the point where I would say that one is definitively better than the rest, but it is worth noting that if you are somebody that likes to buy multiples of the same boots, but you tend to get them in different colorways, just realize that every colorway does tend to be just a little bit different. When it comes to sole plate tech, there's really only one standout out of this bunch, and that is the Mercurial, where of course this boot does feature their 3/4 length zoom unit sitting from the tip of the toe, basically going into the base of the heel. This really provides this sensation of underfoot cushion and a little bit of kind of bounciness that they promote as somewhat of a speed element, but I would argue more so that it has to do with overall comfort and giving you that little bit of impact protection that historically football boots with a solid plastic sole plate have never really provided. Also, the feel of the sole plate is relatively responsive, although definitely not as stiff as what you can get from some other speed boots, whereas the other two options, particularly the Predator, more so aims just to provide a solid underfoot feel with its solid plastic sole plate. It's got good flexibility to it, but it's certainly not on the overly flimsy side, whereas the Nike Phantom GX, or Luna 2 in this particular situation, they now have the same sole plate when you're talking about the FG variation, again, has a little bit more of a flexible feel through the forefoot, where it is worth noting that Rodri himself does tend to play in the soft ground variation of this boot, which does also have an entirely different sole plate than what the retail FG model would have. So I know a lot of people aren't big fans of this sole plate design that has carried over from the original Phantom Luna, and it would appear that Rodri himself also isn't the biggest fan, or at the very least hasn't made the switch to something similar to this design. When it comes to traction, once again, there really is only one standout here, where in the case of the Predator, it's pretty much giving you the same layout you're going to find across the board from the Adidas brand, where you get your 4 studs under the heel, your 6 studs through the forefoot with the 1 support stud in the middle. They're triangle in shape, as you can see, which do provide more bite than I think a lot of people would expect, but for the most part, if you've worn an Adidas boot since 2010, you kind of know what to expect from this layout. It performs well. I suppose there's really no need for them to make any major changes, but it's certainly offering no surprises. Whereas in the case of the Nike Phantom, whether it's the Luna or the GX2, I know a lot of people are not big fans of this particular FG stud pattern, with of course the circle of 5 blades at the tip of the toe that Nike claims is supposed to prioritize rotational movements. It does in fact not do that. It just seems to cling to the playing surface, and in general, because of the all blade design, it has the feel of a speed boot where you get plenty of bite when pushing off, but if the goal was to be able to twist and pivot a little bit more easily, you're not necessarily getting that sensation from this particular stud pattern. However, you do have the option of going for the AG Pro variation, which not only changes the stud pattern for something a lot more traditional, it also gives you the original Phantom GX sole plate, which I would argue is also that little bit better, which of course leaves us with Vinny's Nike Mercurial, where of course the Mercurial series has always been known for top-notch aggressive stud patterns, and this latest model is no different. Blades in the heel, chevron blades in the forefoot. Definitely a stud pattern that I would say is better suited for use on firm natural grass that is on the softer side, just because the studs are quite long and do need to dig into the ground to feel and perform optimally. But in the right playing conditions, there is no denying if you're looking to feel as fast as possible, this stud pattern definitely does that. When it comes to weight, there's definitely a difference between these three, but I don't think the difference is as big as a lot of people might expect. All in the same size, 9.5 US. We'll start off with what is the heaviest of the three, that being the Predator Elite FT. You can see that they weigh in at 7.7 ounces, the equivalent of 219 grams, which is about on par with what you're going to find from most top-end models these days outside of the speed category. We'll throw on the Luna 2, and you can see that they weigh in at 7.2 ounces, the equivalent of 205 grams, so roughly 15 grams less than the Predators. And then we'll throw on the Mercurial Vapor 16 Elite, which you can see weighs in at 6.7 ounces, the equivalent of 190 grams, yet another 15 grams lighter than the Lunas. Meaning that from the lightest to the heaviest, there's a weight difference of roughly 30 grams, which is definitely noticeable. Certainly the Mercurials feel lighter than the Predators, but at the same time, if you're buying a pair of Preds, you're probably not overly concerned with them being as light as possible. And for what they are, I think they're a lot lighter than a lot of people would expect. The Mercs would obviously be the way to go if you are prioritizing having the lightest possible feel on your feet, where the Phantom Luna kind of falls right there in the middle, lighter than most, but not necessarily speed boot light. When it comes to fit and feel on feet, obviously the two Nike boots are going to be very similar in terms of material makeup when it comes to the upper, given that they're both grip knit materials, where the Mercurials are going to be on the thinner side, and the Lunas, as well as the GX2, is going to have a little bit of extra padding and thickness to its grip knit upper. In terms of what you feel on feet though, I wouldn't say that there's a gigantic difference between the two. They're both relatively comfortable and have that kind of pliable sock-like sensation. Certainly there's a little bit of extra structure to the Mercurial, especially with that tighter wrap and lower profile that it has through the midfoot. It just feels like it squeezes your foot a little bit more tightly. However, you will find that the Lunas as well as the GXs do taper a little bit more in the toe box area, which I'm not particularly a big fan of, where the Mercurial is a little bit more rounded at the very front. Another difference between these two is going to have to do with the feel of the sole plate underfoot, where obviously the plastic sole plate of the Luna feels pretty ordinary, where the Mercurial has that 3/4 length zoom unit that gives you that little bit of a bouncy kind of underfoot cushion sensation that you're really not going to get from anything else currently on the market. It's something I really like about the Mercurials and hope that Nike brings this technology to some of their other lines, because for those that don't necessarily love the fit and feel of a Merc, I think they would really enjoy this bit of technology. In terms of overall fit, you're definitely going to find that the Phantoms are a wider fitting football boot through the heel, midfoot, and forefoot area, but again, taper a little bit more through the toes, which is kind of an unusual decision. The Mercurials are relatively slim all the way through, but at the same time are still going to be accommodating for a wide variety of foot types as long as you like that tighter overall fit. If you need extra width through the toes, I don't think either of these would be a fantastic option, but for the vast majority of people, they should work. Certainly though, the Phantoms would be that little bit wider. And in terms of peak overall comfort, again, personal preference in regards to fit is going to be a big one here, but I would actually say that I would be slightly more comfortable playing in the Lunas than I would in the Mercs. And that's mainly down to the fact that I don't love an overly tight fit when it comes to comparing the two control boots, because let's be real, if you're interested in the Predators, you're probably not that interested in the Mercurials. These are two boots that kind of aim to achieve the same things in terms of how they're marketed, but they do so in very different ways, and that obviously you get the knitted upper with the Phantoms, and you get more of a synthetic leather-like material with the Predators. That right out of the box, it's very noticeable that the Preds are just a lot stiffer than the other two boots that we're talking about in this video. They do require the most break-in time, but I wouldn't necessarily say that they are uncomfortable out of the box. After a little bit of wear time, they soften up significantly, and the end result is a pair of football boots that do have a little bit of that kind of old school power boot charm that you're just not going to find from anything else currently on the market. They're solid without being bulky. They feel nimble, they feel responsive, they feel like what a modern day Predator model should feel like, in my opinion at least. I know a lot of people would still love to see, including myself, a natural leather Predator model, but for what this is right now, I think they've actually done a really nice job. In terms of the overall fit and shaping, despite the Predator maybe coming across as a bulkier football boot visually, it's actually, I would say, a little bit slimmer almost all the way through when compared to the Phantoms that just have a little bit of extra width and a little bit more volume. That's not to say that the Predators won't work for most people, but if you did have really, really wide feet, I don't necessarily think they're going to be the best option. And then as far as sizing is concerned, because we didn't talk about it when I had the Mercs on feet, all of the boots across the board in this video do run true to size. I'm wearing all of them in my usual size 9.5 US, and the fit and the length is perfect. So regardless of which one you're interested in, going for your normal size for the best possible fit is what I would personally recommend. So in conclusion, are the football boots of what are technically the three best players in the world also the three best football boots in the world? I think that's definitely up for debate, but there's no question that there's not a bad choice between these three. Having said all that, just like all three of these players are very different from each other, so are their football boots, meaning that it would be extremely unfair for me to say that one is objectively the best, rather than telling you that I think the best one for you is very much going to depend on your own personal preferences. Because objectively, I'd argue that the Mercurial would be the best of the bunch. It's the lightest, it offers the most aggressive traction, it definitely has the most interesting and useful tech in the sole plate. It gives you all the extra grip that the other two provide, and they ultimately just feel really good. However, it's a tight-fitting football boot and a style of boot, given how thin the upper is, that won't necessarily be for everybody. If you like a speed boot, this would be by far the best choice of these three though. Where the Predators are kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. It's a football boot for somebody that doesn't necessarily care about having the thinnest, lightest thing out there. They're a little bit nostalgic because they want this fold-over flap tongue like the Predator used to have back in the day. They like the old school rubber striking elements that definitely provide lots of grip, but do add bulk to the surface of the upper. The boot as a whole is maybe a little bit bulkier than what you're going to find from the vast majority of modern boots, but it's really all of these elements combined that make this such a unique experience compared to most of the other options that are currently on the market. These days, it technically falls under the control boot category, but it really does have those power boot vibes that you just can't get anymore. Where, funny enough, the Luna 2 or the GX2, if you don't like the mid-cut thing, kind of feels like the middle ground between these two football boots, definitely trending a little bit more towards the Mercurials given the similarity of the grip knit upper. However, unlike the Mercs, they do have that little bit of extra thickness and padding to the material as a whole. Definitely some extra width that relates a little bit more closely to something like the Predator, and of course a more aggressive stud pattern, but the option of something less aggressive with the AG Pro variation. Again, if extra grip and a sock-like feel is priority for you, I definitely think the current Nike Phantom is a fantastic choice. Personally, out of these three, I'm a Pred guy just because I'm such a big fan of what this boot kind of represents in terms of history and also how different it feels compared to so many football boots on the market, but you could kind of say the same thing about the other two. Like I said, it really just depends on what you're looking for.